Hey, welcome. It's Woke Wednesdays. Welcome to Woke Wednesdays. We do this every single Wednesday, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Every week, it's a different topic. My name is Herson Sanchez. I am a second-year doctoral student here at Florida International University, located in Miami, Florida. And you are?
My name is Angelica. You guys, in the comments, I guess you can call me Angie. I am also an undergraduate student at FIU. I study women's and gender studies and anthropological studies. And we're here to talk about mental health advocacy, I suppose.
I hope so.
If not, I don't know what I'm doing here.
We can talk about something else. But yeah, so welcome to Woke Wednesday. Super excited to have everyone here. And like Angelica said, tonight we're talking about mental health advocacy. So if this is your first time tuning into Woke Wednesdays, we try to make this as interactive as possible. If you have to leave and end up missing part of the show will be posted on the Instagram page for 24 hours after the show, and it will also go on YouTube. I see we got Keelan here saying hello. We got more people who just joined asking who you are. So do you mind introducing yourself one more time?
Yeah, sure. For everybody who just tuned in, my name is Angie. I am an undergraduate student at FIU, and I'm studying women's and gender studies. I'm a huge mental health advocate for all kinds of mental health, and that's what our main topic is today. So
let's get started. So what do y'all think mental health is? How do y'all define mental health advocacy? What does it mean to you? Have you ever been an advocate for mental health? We're going to throw out some broad questions. Ivy is saying hello. We got Nikki Spam joining, Emma, Keelan, Kayla, Pam. Got a bunch of folks joining on. So yeah, how do you define mental health advocacy? What does that mean to you? Have you ever heard that phrase? And while you're kind of typing in the comments, feel free to ask whatever you would like, comment whatever you would like. We will try our best to address your question and or comment. So Angelica, mental health advocacy, how do you kind of define it? What does that mean to you?
Well, mental health, in a sense, it's exactly what it sounds like. It is all about whatever goes on in your head, and it's pretty much adjacent to physical health. I would say it's not just as important, it's actually more important. Your mental health affects the rest of your body, how you function physically, socially. It affects all aspects of your life, your sleep, your social life, your eating habits, and any kind of relationships you have with people. Mental health advocacy is simply, trying to put the opinions and feelings of people who struggle with their mental health, or even people who have great mental health and great mental habits, kind of out there, and making sure that somebody is advocating for them and really talking about what affects them, what's going on, in the news or in real life that is taking a toll on them or affecting them in a negative or even a positive way.
Quick question. So you said it's more important than physical health.
Personally, that's an opinion.
Could you kind of elaborate on that a little bit? And so why is that your opinion? Why do you think that? I think that's an interesting point. And what do y'all think? What do y'all think about that?
Personally, it is an opinion. I'm not saying at all that this is fact. But I personally believe that mental health, it has more of an effect on how people interact with each other and how we interact with ourselves. So I think that it's just important forming a relationship with yourself and what that relationship is about, as your relationships with other people are. How people talk about you make friends. You should be your own friend. You should get to know yourself. Mental health is a huge part of that. And I think, like I said, it has to do with everything else that goes on in our lives.
Yeah.
So.
And I think How's We Fit, amazing person, which one day I will meet in person. She's saying, I think she's agreeing with you. She's saying mind over matter equals mental health, which dictates everything.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I just thought that was a really interesting point to elaborate on. So how did you get kind of did you kind of become to be an advocate for mental health? What's your kind of tie to mental health?
I guess it started with my education and my family. Even when I was back in high school, I've always been interested in how other people view mental health. In cities like Miami, we have a very large population, very dense. We all kind of come into contact with each other and what other people think about different things. And mental health is one of those very controversial things where a lot of people have very strong opinions about mental health. So I think places like this is where mental health advocacy really needs to focus on, because there's so many people with so many different opinions and everybody wants to feel like they're right. So I think that showing people about what they believe in, what part of it is right and what part of it is wrong, what part of it is a result of stigma in society, you know, about mental health. I've personally had my own journey with mental health. Everybody has their own journey, but I've been struggling with my mental health since I was in, I would say, middle school.
Wow.
Which is when, you know, a lot of people start coming into themselves. They start developing their personal sense of self, style. They start developing a lot more relationships and cultivating those relationships. And all through high school, it kind of just, you know, kind of creeps up on you. It's not really one of those things that, you know, you actively see like a huge change in. But when I got to college, it was very different. There's a lot of people, there's a lot of things going on. You kind of have to start adulting, which sucks.
Quick question, because I think that's important. You said it started when you were a child, right? When you were in middle school. How did you know at that particular moment that this is when something was starting? Like, what?
I didn't know in that moment.
But
it's kind of like an afterthought. But when I think about, you know, my own mental health and how I've perceived myself and how that's changed over time, it really does start when, you know, you first start getting that social experience. And for me, that did start in middle school. I didn't have a lot of friends before that. I was kind of a lonely kid. But it definitely, you know, that kind of social introduction makes an impact on everybody. And for me, I wouldn't say that the impact was negative, wasn't positive, but I definitely knew that based on the experiences that I was having as I interacted with people, I didn't like people. And I know a lot of people, a lot of people say that they don't like people, but you can definitely, I feel like after you interact with a lot of different kinds of people, there's a level of, you know, this is a normal feeling, you know, people don't like putting themselves out there, and then there's also a feeling of, I really don't want to be here. It makes me uncomfortable. It makes me feel like I'm not here. I'm not me. Yeah. And that was kind of a feeling that I struggled with for a really long time, especially in high school. A lot of people talk about, you know, in high school you have to make a lot of friends, you have to put yourself out there, you go out, you really form yourself as an individual. And I didn't feel like I was doing that right. I kind of felt like, you know, I wasn't doing any of those things actually, but it was really just because I didn't want to put myself out there. And when I got to college, I realized that it was more than just not wanting to put myself out there. It was more of, you know, how I viewed myself, how I viewed my self-worth, my confidence, things like that. They weren't there, you know? A lot of people have those kinds of issues, but there's a level of how normal it is.
How is it fit is saying that she became really, really introverted. And she's saying that, she feels you, she's agreeing with you. I'm guessing she also kind of had, I think it goes to your point, that a lot of people
share that kind of experience, or a similar one. A lot of people like that, they feel like they become introverted. A lot of people feel like they become more extroverted when they reach high school or college. And that has a lot to do with how you interact with people around you, how you interact with yourself, how you relate to other people around you. I think that had a big impact on me because I didn't feel like I could relate to anybody else around me. when I was a senior in high school, something happened on social media. There was it was some kind of movement. I wouldn't even know how to describe it, but it was like a movement where people really started talking about how they felt on things like Tumblr, Twitter, Instagram, and people were openly talking about, being depressed or being anxious or just in general how they felt trying to navigate their life. And I think that's where I started relating to things that people were writing, things that people were posting about. They actually resonated with me, and I felt like I could relate to that more than I could to my friends or to my family or anybody immediately around me. So I really am thankful for that, and I try to continue that in my own Twitter account, my own Instagram. I try to talk openly about it because I think it's important. You never know who's reading.
Yeah.
You never know, if one of your followers, even if you don't know them personally, or maybe it's your really close friend that, they really read what you're writing and what you're posting or reposting in the case of Twitter, and they see something that really makes them go, yeah, I relate to that. So
I think that's actually how we kind of met through social media. You post a lot, and if y'all don't follow her, please follow her. You post a lot about body image and body shaming.
My captions, my totally unrelated captions to my pictures. But that's I just kind of realized that was, those kind of topics, mental health, body positivity, racism, sexism, ableism, those are topics that people don't really feel comfortable overtly talking about, especially if they're not familiar with them, if they haven't been introduced to them. Yeah. So sometimes I'll post a picture of myself when I'm out or with my friends, and then there will be a completely unrelated caption about body positivity, which has kind of been my vibe lately. I've posted about not bothering with people that just blatantly try to argue with me. And I post a lot on Twitter. My Twitter is AngelicaMK_. If anybody...
I'm still trying to figure out Twitter.
Quickly, if anybody's active.
So we have a question. Jones of 3 is asking, what is normal? Defining normality opinion. So do you have kind of a definition? I think I have one too.
I mean, everybody's definition of normal is going to be different. It's really getting to know yourself and being really honest with yourself and really saying, doing research, that's huge. Knowing where the line is when feelings really start to negatively impact your day-to-day. I would say that's a lot of people's professional opinions about where things that might seem normal really start to make an impact on you. Yeah. So that was something that really, I really started thinking, what is making my days negative? What is it that's making me feel a certain negative way? That was really big in defining normal for me.
And if we look at this from a historical or kind of philosophical standpoint, a good book I would recommend is Michel Foucault. He was a French historian, philosopher. He wrote a book called Discipline and Punish. He wrote a lot of books, but one of them was Discipline and Punish, and he looks at historically how normalization kind of happened, and it really kind of came with the inception of social sciences. And he traces this back historically, how if someone that would now have a, let's say, mental illness or something, back then people weren't defined by that. So he really looks at it historically, very, very interesting. So Discipline and Punish by Michel Foucault, highly recommend for y'all to read it. Very, very just fascinating and interesting stuff. Pan de Uno is asking, did you try to bring up those feelings when you were younger? If so, were you dismissed? Did people tell you to just get over it?
I never really talked about it a lot when I was much younger, when I kind of started feeling that way. It was more of for me personally, I know other people have different experiences. Other people do try to open up and talk about it. I think maybe towards the end of high school, I started talking about it a little bit with my friends that were really close, like 2 or 3 people. It wasn't until I hit college that I brought it up to my parents, and I think I think because I waited a little longer to bring it up, they were much more willing to listen to what I had to say. And they were much more accepting of what I was saying about myself because, I think for parents it's really hard. They always see you as their kids. I have the privilege of having parents who really have raised me to be an individual, always wanted me to make my own decisions and judge myself. I was saying, and I know that I'm very privileged, in that sense, so I can definitely accept that part of myself. There are plenty of people who don't have anybody in their personal life or even professional life because they don't have access to that kind of thing, that they can't talk about it or they feel like they don't have anywhere to turn. So that also makes a huge impact on how somebody comes into themselves and talks about their mental health. It's definitely different talking to yourself versus talking to somebody else.
No, I think you're making a great point. Jones of 3 is saying we must learn about ourselves equals mental health to accept our normal.
Yeah.
So it really kind of gets at your point again. But one of your other points that you're kind of making is that this is not easy to kind of talk about.
Yeah.
So was there something that was kind of like an impetus, like a catalyst for you to say, hey, you know what, I'm going to talk about this with someone?
For me, I didn't bring it up unto my mom until I was already a student here. I was living on campus, and right after my first semester of college finished, I had a mental breakdown. And I felt like my safety at that point was worth more than any kind of backlash I could receive. That was when I opened up to my mom about what I was going through and things that were going on. And she's really, like I said, the privilege that I experienced with having the kind of mom that I have, she's super supportive of me. So I definitely felt like I was in a safer place after talking to her and knowing that she had my back. That was definitely, I would say that was my catalyst, knowing that there was somebody there for me. Made me much more open to researching and looking into things like that. Not that I hadn't already, but it's different. When you're really looking for resources, it's like taking that first step to helping yourself. So that's really what made me more open about my own mental health and also talking to other people about my experience with it and, encouraging other people to also follow through and think about themselves and put their own safety first. Because that's probably the most important aspect of dealing with your own mental health is putting your safety first and really thinking about what is affecting you, thinking about your triggers and things like that.
And if y'all have any questions, please feel free. I know we have a lot of people joining in. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask or comment. So one of the points that we also wanted to make tonight was like these physical kind of manifestations regarding mental health. So were there any like physical signs that maybe be kind of spurring up at the same time that you were having this mental breakdown?
A lot of people actually experience mental breakdowns as their most physical, obviously physical, I should say, sign that their mental health is deteriorating or just poor or going in that direction.
Real quick, can we kind of explain what a mental breakdown is? Like,
that's a hard one.
In your experience, and people that you might know.
Yeah. That's definitely a hard one. You have mental breakdowns that are, fast, simple, and maybe a little bit more on the mild side. And you also have what happened to me, which was a much more dramatic, it lasted about 2 weeks. And my personal experience was that I wasn't able to sleep. I wasn't eating very much. My weight was fluctuating. Even though I wasn't eating, I was gaining weight. I even broke out from all the stress levels. Stress was a huge thing. you've brought up stress a few times on the show from different reasons.
Yeah.
And stress is one of the most common symptoms and causes of deteriorating mental health. It can cause your mental health to decline, and sometimes even though everything is going on well, everything in your life is positive, you still feel that stressful, overwhelming sense of something is going to go wrong. That's also a really big symptom that a lot of people experience.
You said something really, really interesting right now. You said even when everything in your life is going as best as it can be, or as best as it might ever be, you could still experience some type of mental breakdown or stress or anything.
That's actually something that I learned when I started going to therapy. Right after this mental breakdown, I realized that I needed help. I started seeing, if any of you are FIU students or know anybody at FIU has a really great counseling center. It's free for any registered student. The fees are built in to your tuition and fees, so
they already pay for it anyway.
You can go and you can get therapy, you can get counseling, you can have group sessions, and they do have a psychiatrist. I went there, and my therapist, a really good point that she made to me was, how I felt at the start of the previous semester versus how I felt at the end. And at the beginning, I had told her I felt like everything was going great. I was making great progress. I was doing well. And then everything just kind of sort of deteriorated from there. But one of the things that I remember telling her was that I felt great and I still felt like something was going to go wrong. And she said that is actually a really common symptom for a lot of people. They feel like this impending sense of, oh my God, I'm so anxious, I'm so stressed, and I don't even know what I'm anxious about, because I don't have a reason. I'm just stressed out about nothing. That is also a really big symptom of today's population. I would say like that Generation Z, millennials, a big symptom for us and how we interpret our mental health. A lot of people just kind of cast it aside, and it's a lot. It can be a lot more complicated than that. Feelings like that, when everything in your life is positive, you should feel positive. And if you're feeling negative, that might be something that you might want to look into. That might be something that you want to talk about to somebody. And it really manifests, in physical health. It makes it feel like, like I said, I personally experience issues with sleeping and eating. Those are really common, and they're some of the most obvious, something that you can very easily track. Getting sick more often. A lot of people being so stressed can lower your immune system and the strength of your immune system. That's a huge thing. It's different for a lot of people. Some people experience these kinds of symptoms really mildly. It's just kind of it's not a big deal. I don't know why it happened, but it'll pass. And some people experience these things on the extreme end of it, which is when things can get more dangerous. When you have people that aren't sleeping for days, which is what happened to me. And I needed to go see the psychiatrist on campus, an emergency visit, because I hadn't slept in 3 days. And I also wasn't eating. So that's where you have those kinds of dangerous situations that kind of happen when we kind of cast our health to the side and we don't really make that connection between our mental health and our physical health.
Yeah, I worked, and to your point, I worked in the dorms for a couple of years, and one of the more we used to have a phone with us, and in case of an emergency, people would call the phone, and one of the more just common phone calls that I would get was usually suicide attempts. And it usually had something to do with someone's mental illness, trying to overdose on pills, or maybe it was a weapon. But it was always tied back to that. And had they been talking to someone professional, a friend, someone to go to, most often what we would find out is that maybe this could have been avoided instead of getting to this point. Hey, Carla. One of the students from last semester. Hey, Natasha. So yeah, but I mean, absolutely, this is extremely important, but it's also extremely taboo.
Yeah.
Right? This is something that we're in our society. Like, what do you mean you go to like a therapist? That like, there's clearly something wrong with you if you go to a therapist. There's a lot of taboo and so have you ever kind of dealt with that? Have you ever talked to anyone about that?
Personally, I have dealt with that. Not from my parents, which is a really common experience for other people, but from my extended family. I am Colombian. My mom's family is very Colombian. And they don't really believe in mental health. I don't know how they don't really believe in it, but they kind of attribute those kinds of things to other things, you know. They're very religious. They're very, you should pray on it kind of people. And it was just much more dismissive than I was used to. I actually don't deal with them very much anymore because I felt like, caring about somebody extends a little further than just, going to birthdays and events with them. But I feel like that's a really big deal, socio-historically, looking at things like that. Everybody knows about mental asylums. That was a really big thing in the early 20th century even, a lot of people don't understand how recently that kind of thing was removed. And it wasn't sponsored by the state or the government anymore. We still have asylum-like buildings and companies that sponsor them. So I think the bottom line, that's just carried over. People thought they were crazy. That's just kind of the overall assumption. And even though that ended, the mindset of that hasn't passed.
Yeah.
So a lot of the younger generations are really the ones bringing up mental health and mental health advocacy. They're the ones that are fighting for it because, they don't have that same mindset. They didn't grow up around that mindset. And I think that's really important. To have that kind of fresh view on it. That's, I think, what's kind of bringing it to the light now.
Yeah, absolutely. Jones of Three is saying that some minority communities struggle with acceptance. Mm-hmm. I believe it's due to our lack of education. What are your thoughts?
Yes and no, because me personally, I don't think that education is really the right word. I think it's just acceptance. I think just listening to other people and listening to what they have to say and taking it at face value kind of will do more than education ever will. You have people that, have never gone to high school or college a day in their life, and they're some of the most heartfelt people that I've ever met. Some of my family, the few members that do actually have been very accepting of me. Some of them never went to high school. And it doesn't really have to do with formal education or even informal education so much as just accepting others and really actively listening to them and saying, I hear you. I hear what you're going through, and I'm here for you if you need me. It doesn't really take that much of an understanding of what mental health is or anything like that, just to care about somebody. But but definitely miseducation we're fortunate enough to live somewhere like Miami, which is a huge city, even though I still think the public education system here sucks. Mm-hmm. But we have a lot of people around us, a lot of people with different experiences, and that kind of informal education that happens does make an impact. And it also just so happens that a lot of people in Miami, a lot of young people, like I said before, do advocate for mental health. Again, because we have so many different communities here, so many different backgrounds and opinions on it. This is just one of those places that people really feel it's important to advocate for that. So having that kind of, those kinds of people around us, it does make a difference.
Jones is saying education in the light of knowing or understanding. Mm-hmm. I think this is more complex than just education or acceptance. I think there's a lot of overlap around it, a lot of great areas. I think we can analyze this from particular ways, like from a class perspective,
Yeah.
like poor people, how do they
Yeah.
kind of conceptualize mental illnesses? How do upper class people? What do they do that's different, right? We could look at it racially, we could look at it ethnically, from a
Yeah.
religious standpoint, right? Someone who is extremely Christian fundamentalist might think that is a demon that you need to pray out, you know. So like we can look at it from various ways. I think education can never hurt.
Yeah.
At least, right? Just for people to be
Definitely.
educated on it. Maybe you can't throw the fancy terms at
Yeah.
them, right? You know, this is, you know, attention deficit hyperactivities. Me, you know, my mom doesn't even speak English. You know, I barely do. So like, I think this is very complex. We actually did have a doctor, a psychologist on the show a couple of months ago. Really interesting. Just look, he actually works here. Dr. Matthew Woodfork. He works in at the counseling center here at FIU. We'll probably have to invite him back to also talk with us, to give us like a doctor's perspective on this once again. But I think you're absolutely right. I think at a core there is a sense of just caring, right, of people, and just willing to understand, just being open-minded.
Yeah.
Type of thing.
From a medical perspective, it is different, you know, because that's where you're really getting into. You're really looking at technical things, symptoms, what your experiences are. But just from an overall perspective, I think, you know, one of the biggest benefits is just listening and really trying to understand what somebody else is going through. A lot of people just don't have that kind of exposure that I am talking about, you know, really knowing other people who struggle with the same issues, or even I would say just having somebody to talk to, because that does make a huge difference. Just that's everything, you know. To some people, having somebody there is everything. That makes a huge difference for them. So
You're right.
Huge.
And this, we were talking about stress earlier, and how it has, it can have different sources for different people. Like it can come from a different place for everybody. In addition to like your work life, your personal life, whatever, you overlap that with, you know, race, class, gender,
so
sexual
many
orientation,
overlapping, so many intersections of issues that we deal with in our life that can contribute to our mental health, and our physical health as well, that really might be overlooked. Especially on an everyday kind of level. They're not things that you think about every day. Stress is just one of those things that it is different for everybody. There's not just one reason to be stressed out, right? Everybody at some point in their life will feel some kind of stress. The levels of that may be different. What you're stressed about will be different. But it has so much to do with your health. A huge thing that usually comes with stress is fatigue. Which was, as me and Gerson were talking about before the show.
It's okay though.
Gerson.
You were ethnic on me. You're right, Gerson.
We were talking about fatigue and stress and how those tend to overlap, you know, and intersect for a lot of people. Fatigue is one of the symptoms that is used both in mental health and physical health a lot. When you go see a psychologist or your physician, they both at some point might ask about fatigue and stress. And for me personally, fatigue was one of those symptoms that I experienced heavily. I can think the last 2 years of my life, I don't remember a point where I haven't been, you know, overwhelmed and felt like I was just tired all the time. And it's something that, even though people will experience different levels of fatigue, it is kind of a universal symptom for most people.
Now, before the show, we're talking about fatigue, and you said it's a symptom versus what? I forgot. You're like the same thing. I'm like, oh, I never thought about it that way.
One of the things that I had wanted to bring up was, especially for young people, dealing with this kind of political and social climate, people who are going into college graduates that are entering, the workforce. We talk a lot about feeling tired. And being tired is like a feeling. Fatigue would be what we would consider the symptom of being tired. There is a difference between just waking up, like you haven't slept. Even though you slept, you feel like you didn't. And then, just as your day gets better, you're just thinking, I just want to go home. I just want to be in bed. I want to sleep more. I think while it's difficult to really pinpoint, because again, experiences are different for different people, fatigue has much more of an impact on your day-to-day life, and even in the long term. When you think about, just you don't have the energy to do anything, when you don't have I would even say drive or motivation to do anything that is really a result of you're being tired. It's more than just being tired. That's, I think, one of those things that people really, they don't really see that as a symptom of anything. It's just kind of one of those things where you say, I just need to go home and get some rest. And that, sometimes we kind of undervalue ourselves, and we undermine what impacts those kinds of things can have in our lives. And fatigue, like I said before, it's a really universal symptom. A lot of people who struggle with their mental health will experience fatigue at some point, especially people who experience things like depression, anxiety. Me personally, with my experience with bipolar disorder, I've experienced fatigue countless times, where sometimes it's much worse than others. So for different people, while it's experienced differently, it's still a symptom, and it's very valid. I feel like a lot of people are very dismissive of their fatigue. They're very, I won't be tired later. It'll be fine. It'll get better.
Yeah.
And sometimes, while sometimes it does get better, having that kind of mindset can be detrimental in the long run. That's something that, when you look at it overall, or I would even say when you look at it, when you talk to other people, a professional, a friend, about those kinds of things, those kinds of symptoms and experiences, and somebody else is asking you about it, they're saying, well, when was the last time you felt like you weren't fatigued? When was the last time you felt like you weren't tired? And you really start to think about these things, and you're like, whoa, holy shit.
Yeah.
I can't remember. That was like my moment of, whoa.
Yeah.
So.
One thing that's interesting is that, so my mom was recently diagnosed with lupus. So I've been doing a lot of research on what lupus is, watching countless just videos, documentaries, reading books, whatever I can do to just become more educated on it. And I've been learning, and I've been learning about being a vegan, vegetarian, and the impacts of animal products on our bodies.
Mm-hmm.
And if we look at something historically, in the 1960s is when, and we've been kind of talking about tonight how more and more we see millennials, Generation Z,
mm-hmm.
becoming people who are complaining more about having just fatigue, tiredness,
mm-hmm.
Feeling just not feeling as good as they could be. In the 1960s, we saw that food became different. Food was kind of changed around the 50s and the 60s,
mm-hmm.
Especially in the United States. How it was being produced, how it was being processed, how it was being eaten. We saw a lot more TV advertisements. TV was kind of new. It was coming out. People were advertising around processed food. So we see this push for different types of food that people weren't eating before, right? In addition to pesticides and all this stuff. And all the stuff we're putting into our bodies. We look at fast food restaurants. I'm at a point now where I almost threw up last time I went to Wendy's. So I haven't been to Wendy's in a long time. because the way food is processed, so everything you put in your body is going to affect you.
Yeah.
Right? So I'm not saying that we can cure everything with going vegan and plant-based diets. I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is that I think some of these things do come from the food that we eat and the things that we put in our body or don't put in our body. Mm-hmm. Right? Most of Americans don't drink a lot of water. Right?
Yeah.
They don't. I drink a gallon of water a day. I mean, for the past year, and it's been amazing. But most Americans have horrible diets. And if you look at Americans in particular, and the way prescription drugs are prescribed to Americans, mm-hmm. it is in large quantities. So I do think that's something to talk about, something to address. We will be having an episode on being a vegan. Again, I'm not saying that everybody needs to go vegan, nothing like that. But I am saying to be more cautious and conscious of what we're putting in our bodies, because that does and it will ultimately affect us. Maybe we might not gain weight or anything, but I think it also will affect our mental health. That's something that we have to keep in.
Physical conditions, like you mentioned earlier, your mom being diagnosed with lupus. There are a lot of physical conditions, and just referring back when we think about mental health, a lot of mental health has to do with what you're putting in your body, whether that's something physical like food or your attitudes, the kind of attitudes that you're attracting, the people that you're around. Those kinds of things affect you mentally and physically. And when we talk about physical conditions like lupus, my personal experience with things like fibromyalgia, that really it has to do with things that are coming into contact with our body. A lot of symptoms might be able to even be alleviated because of things like diets, exercise, sleep, just changing your habits. A lot of mental health professionals talk about changing habits when it comes to kind of helping control symptoms and things like that. A lot of them talk about coming up with a much more regimented diet, sleep schedule, an exercise routine to try to maintain that balance of physical and mental health, because there's so much that's interconnected with that.
Agreed. Completely agreed. Absolutely. Yeah, so much. I read a book recently called Goodbye Lupus. Check it out. It's a bestseller in the country right now. And it kind of gets at this, written by a doctor who had lupus, who actually was healed from lupus. She's a medical doctor, she's a psychiatrist, and she gets at the importance of diet and the tie to physical and mental health.
Yeah.
Really fascinating stuff. I definitely encourage y'all to look that up. But it's not an easy thing to do, especially when people are busy, have family, have children. People are in college, doing their thing, trying to get ahead in life. This is not an easy thing to do. So I guess one question would be, and y'all, again, I see a lot of people joining. Feel free to ask questions or comments. What are some things that you do to try to kind of be like, okay, I'm cool, like try to stay, I don't know if the term, and please excuse my ignorance, like try to stay sane, I don't know, I think that might be offensive. And if I am, I'm sorry. But
some people might find that offensive.
Yeah. So, and this is part of. So one thing I do advocate on Woke Wednesdays is kind of exposing your prejudices and biases, because if you don't, you can't correct it.
Yeah.
So if you know you're gonna be offensive, I think at least preface it, and help me unlearn what I've been socialized to know. So what would be like the better way to say that? And then
I guess just saying, keeping yourself grounded, keeping yourself grounded is a really big term for people who might feel like they're not there. Part of the time they feel like they're dissociating. People who have those kinds of symptoms, a lot of therapists or psychologists will say help you feel grounded. Like feeling like you're safe, feeling you're in a better place. And what you said before about talking about biases, privilege is also a huge thing that's talked about when it comes to mental health advocates. I experience the same kind of privilege. I am white. I am not low income. If anything, I'm middle income. And I can still get access. I'm a college student, you know, access to higher education, accesses to universities that have the kind of resources that I was able to get, the counseling center. You know, having that resource there was huge for me, because I don't think without it, I don't think I'd be in a better place. I think I would still be stuck in those same feelings that I was experiencing, and I probably wouldn't have given myself the time and the space to grow and kind of just learn how to accommodate to what I was experiencing. Mental health isn't really, at least when you talk specifically about mental health illnesses, they're not something that, you know, they get cured. They're not something that you can just kind of push away. They will be there. You can do things to control it. You can take medication. You can change habits, but it will be there, and it's something that a lot of people just kind of, in order to deal with it, they kind of just learn to live with it, how to kind of accommodate it in their daily life so they're supporting themselves and not feeling like they're not in control. So what you asked before, I would probably say self-care. Self-care is the biggest thing anybody could do to really make themselves feel grounded. And self-care is for everybody.
I have a shirt
for...
that says that today. Did y'all see it? Oh.
Yes, the one that you posted in earlier.
Yeah. It says, "I'm not selfish." It's called self-care. Check it out. My homegirl makes these shirts. They're pretty dope. African Belle.
Yes, she's linked in his last linked. Instagram post.
Yeah, so
her account is linked.
Yeah, pretty dope stuff. Yeah, so please talk more about that.
Self-care, again, one of those things that a lot of people do differently. Different things work for different people, but self-care is really just about doing things for yourself. You know, not worrying about other people. They can be simple things like taking a bath, getting a drink of water, you know, showering. Things that a lot of people might struggle with day to day, especially people who have mental illnesses or experiencing things like depression and anxiety. They don't feel like they can go out and do things, and it kind of makes them feel like they're not there, they're not capable of doing anything for themselves. So self-care could be simple. It could be taking a shower and brushing your teeth. It could be just getting out of bed to do something, even if it's taking your dog for a walk. Self-care could also be things like, for people that can afford to do so, buying yourself that shirt that you like, you know? Yeah. Being able to go do something that you're interested in, a hobby or an activity. And they're just things that you're doing for yourself, not really for the benefit of other people. For me, self-care has a lot to do with relaxing. I do things like taking baths. Occasionally, if I feel up for it, I'll go for a run. Exercise is not a huge thing in my life as it used to be. I used to be a track and field athlete. With the advent of fibromyalgia in my life, physical health kind of went out the window. So I think that was also something that I struggled with my mental health. I felt like there was something wrong with me. Like, why is it that I'm not able to go run a mile anymore? Why is it that I just struggle, like it hurts me to get out of bed when I used to be able to run miles at a time? So big changes like that, also symptoms. But so sometimes I incorporate that into my self-care. It'll make me feel like I'm in control of something. Another thing that I personally do for self-care is volunteering. There's a really great organization called Crisis Text Line. I hope that somebody here has heard of it, but if you haven't, that's cool. But it is a great 24/7 free hotline that you can text in anonymously. You can talk to a real person on the other side of your phone screen that is responding to you and talking to you, to get people through and that are going in like an overwhelming moment, people that are in crisis, trying to get them to the other side.
Can you say the name one more time? Crisis what?
Crisis Text Line.
Crisis Text.
They have a website, crisistextline.org.
Crisis. I'm gonna put it in there.
Yep, all together.
Textline.org.
Yep. And they have an Instagram account by the same name, just Crisis Text Line. I've been volunteering with them for almost 2 years. Make 2 years in March.
Oh, wow.
And that was also another thing that was huge for me. It was kind of like one of my moments. My mental breakdown happened in January of my freshman year of college. And once I got through to the other side, it took about a month to get myself in like a regular, a place where I felt like it was almost normal. And after that, I was really trying to focus on self-care in ways that would make me feel better. And I felt like reaching out to other people and helping them was a big thing for me. It kind of made me feel like I wasn't alone. And like, you know, there were other people out there who were not only going through this with me, but also willing to help me. I volunteered for a short period of time on campus with UN Women. I volunteered with animals. I volunteered with PetSmart for a little bit because I had done it before.
This is really interesting, though. So we're talking about practicing self-care, and one of the ways that you practice self-care is by caring about others.
Yeah.
That's so, like, not
for
only
me,
admirable,
that's something
but also very interesting.
That really, like I said, it helps me feel like, you know, I'm not alone. There's other people out there, and I'm lucky. I'm fortunate enough that I'm in a place of privilege where I had access to help. I had access to a therapist that I could talk to, and a lot of people don't have that, and that's what organizations like Crisis Text Line exist for. People who don't have that kind of access, that they can just go talk to somebody, because those kinds of things cost money. You know, I mean, we technically pay for the counseling center through our tuition. That's what funds that. So things like this, that they train us for free. Being a volunteer crisis counselor, all you're doing is donating your time. And these organizations, they totally exist for people who don't have access regularly to use those. Use them as resources and use them as something, you know? Different people get different things out of things like that, but using it as something. And we get a lot of texters who are struggling with their own mental health, and we have a lot of texters who may even have tried to talk to somebody and they just didn't feel like they were getting anywhere. So self-care takes all kinds of forms.
I think, yeah, I mean, that, yes, you're saying such, I'm just listening, you're saying, yeah. So we're coming to the end of the hour. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to ask. Before we close up, I do want to ask, I have two more questions, but one is, for people who feel like they're in a healthier place, right? Maybe mentally, physically. What are some things that they should kind of do, look for in maybe their friends, like to see, hey, I wonder if they're dealing with something. What do you think? What do you suggest?
It really just goes back to being open with your friends. If you feel comfortable, I know some people don't feel comfortable talking to their friends or family members about things like this, or they just don't know where to start. A lot of it is just about listening, you know, really being there for somebody. You never know what kind of impact that makes on somebody else's life. I think it just comes down to that. Just listening and being there. Making yourself seem like you're available to somebody else. Even just not putting pressure on them or anything, but making yourself available to other people. Some people don't have the energy to do that. Yeah. It's very ableist to say that you always have to be available for somebody else. But if you can, if that's something that you're capable of doing, if you feel like it won't compromise where you are in your mental health, then it's something that I would strongly suggest for anybody.
And even it's okay to also just be kind of like a vehicle.
Yeah.
I had some friends come up to me, and one young lady in particular, and told me she was really dealing with a lot. I'll be honest with you, I didn't know how to react. I was like, whoa, this is a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And because I know and I knew that I couldn't be the best resource for her. What I did was I offered to walk her over to the counseling center on campus, and I walked with her. I called and made an appointment. All the pressure was kind of taken off. All we had to do was kind of walk together, had a conversation on the way there, and she started going to therapy. And her and I still keep in contact. She's doing great. But sometimes also knowing your limits as a friend.
Yeah.
That we also have limits.
Yeah, being honest with yourself and being honest with somebody else. You know, with your friend, you were able to help her without putting that kind of pressure on yourself either. That's also really important. If you feel like you're not comfortable, or even if you are and you're very much there for somebody else, just kind of sharing any resources that you know about, things that you might think would be helpful. It might not be helpful for you even. It might not have helped you, but it might help somebody else. It might help a friend. It might help a coworker, a family member. So sharing resources is always a huge thing.
Absolutely. So tomorrow I'll even post the crisistextline.com. I'll put it in the Instagram story. So if anyone needs that, definitely feel free to check them out. Carla's saying, read the power of your subconscious mind. Yeah, that's important too. So 30 seconds, just kind of some parting words for the audience.
Okay.
What do you think?
I think this has been a pretty good talk. Definitely, just to kind of summarize the whole thing, don't dismiss anything that you're going through. Your experiences matter, not just to you but to other people. And don't dismiss any kind of symptoms or feelings that you have right away. Sometimes those kinds of reoccurring feelings, they mean something. And we're very quick in this kind of fast-paced life to just say, you know, I'll deal with it later. And again, that can lead to some pretty dangerous situations. So really being honest with yourself, being open with yourself, and kind of taking it day by day is just sometimes what people need.
Yeah, extremely well said. Thank you so much. She's only 20 years old. She is so smart and so just knowledgeable and insightful. Thank you so much just for coming by, being here with us. Tune in next week. Next week we're talking about the H&M racist incident, Dove's commercial. We're gonna have one of my frat brothers here and one of his friends. They're two black attorneys here in Miami, and we'll be analyzing that from a hate crime perspective, from a discrimination legislation standpoint. So feel free to tune in next week at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Thank you again so much for coming by, and we'll see y'all next week.